Servus and hello, Matthias Eichler here, and this is Singletrack. Thomas Reiss is back from the Kingdom of Bhutan and back on Singletrack to share his experience as the international athlete manager of the epic and unique Snowman Race that just happened a couple weeks ago. We chat about the origins and inspiration for this incredible event, the logistical challenges, and of course, the joys and emotions. This race wasn't an ordinary race, and in many ways, one of the toughest foot races ever put on. But this event was also not just about winning. This event was put on to highlight the challenges of climate change and ring the alarm bells about melting glaciers and the consequences for folks living in mountain regions. Before we dive into this week's show, I wanted to tell you all about one more race I'm putting on this year with Rock Candy Running. Saturnalia is a 10K winter celebration on December 17th on the trails of Squaxin Park in Olympia, Washington. Visit rockcandyrunning.com for all the details and come race with us this December. A brand new trail race, perfect for the whole family. This is Saturnalia. And now, let's hear from Thomas. Thomas, welcome back to Singletrack. I am super excited to have you back on the show because you've just came back from an absolute incredible adventure, an adventure that's been all over social media. Lots of people were mentioning it, talking about it. Snowman Race. There is so much to talk about, and I'm really glad that I have you on the show. Welcome back.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be back. It's like my third time. And
yes, I believe so.
Each one seems to be like a new topic, which is kind of cool. I wonder when we're gonna run out of topics to talk about, because first one was just like my running in general. The second one was mountaineering with my Aconcagua trip, and now we're talking about something that's kind of a little bit of both. Involves climate discussion, climate action, climate change. It involves running a race, which I didn't run since I was the international athlete manager. And it involves big mountains. So it's kind of a little bit of everything here. So, I'm glad to share the story.
Why don't you give us a quick elevator pitch for people who've not really heard about it, which I don't know, he couldn't have. But what was the Snowman Race?
Okay, so we have to backtrack 3 years. The King of Bhutan, His Majesty, the King of Bhutan, he had his idea for his 40th birthday to create an event that brings awareness to climate change. Obviously, we're all aware. We don't need to be a scientist to be aware of melting glaciers. I mean, you've been in the Alps in Switzerland. You look at the Rhone Glacier. You see photos from 50 years ago and photos now. And I don't need to do any scientific research to see the difference. And so he wanted to bring awareness to that because Bhutan is one of only 3 carbon negative countries in the world. But they have horrible problems with climate change. And that's because their location in the middle of the Himalayan mountain range with lots of glaciers that are melting. And then what happens, lakes are busting open and they have horrible flooding and villages get completely wiped away. So that's kind of was his main purpose to that. And so he wanted to bring awareness to that. And he wanted to do that by creating an event that gets a lot of media attention, which obviously Snowman Race has gotten. And so that was 3 years ago. And so that's when the race was originally supposed to happen. But then due to COVID restrictions and stuff, it didn't happen until this year. So it was kind of a mixture, create like this amazing race through the Himalayan mountains. So the athletes see this climate change firsthand, can go back as climate ambassadors, is what we are calling them, to their home countries and talk about it and create publicity for this issue, which hopefully starts this whole wave of people taking action and working towards a common goal of climate change, climate action.
So give us a little bit of a summary of what the race was. So it was a stage race, right? So athletes kind of had ran multiple days, different distances and stuff. Give us a little bit of an idea of what that looked like.
Yeah, so the idea was obviously to get lots of attention for the race. If it's just like, oh, here's another UTMB, here's another tough 100 miler or whatever, not sure if that gets that much attention. So they wanted to create the toughest race ever ran. And if you listen to what the athletes say, we had athletes who have run Hard Rock, Tour de Jeanne, UTMB, Barkley, and they all said this was the toughest race they ever did. So I think we accomplished that. And so, yeah, it was set up as a 5-day stage race with overnight stops. We call them our night halts. And then the next day, 6 a.m., you start from that night halt to the next one. You had to you could do dropbacks at each night halt, but you had to carry some of your gear, so everyone had quite a big pack with them. And so it was a 5-day stage race. Each day was roughly about a marathon, plus or minus a little bit. But we're talking as far as elevation, between 14 and 18,000 feet of elevation. And I would say each day probably had between 8 and 12,000 feet of elevation gain. And the one thing you also have to consider, this is not like the Pacific Crest Trail or something. This is not a really maintained trail. It's a horse trail. It's essentially, it's like a business trail where like horsemen transport goods to like the remote villages like Lunana or Laya, that are very remote villages that you can't reach by car or anything. And so horsemen, they bring in everything from like Trug Lager, the famous beer that we had every day, to like blankets and rice, and so it's really just a rough horse trail. So, and you can go out there and track it. I think it usually takes about 30 days if you track the full Snowman Trail. And there's fewer people who have done that than summited Mount Everest. Which, I mean, two reasons. It's very remote. It's hard to get there. It's an expensive trip, you know, if you want to track it. And, but it's also very, very tough.
Yeah. So how many athletes showed up at the starting line?
So the idea was to make this an invite only race because the logistics are just so complicated. I mean, we had for each night halt, we had about 10 volunteers. We had a doctor, a nurse, horseman, cook, radio guy, a Western person to be there as a aid station captain. I think it was like 10 to 15 people per aid station. It took 6 days to get to the most remote aid station, 6 days of hiking in and 6 days of hiking out. We had to bring tents for everyone, sleeping pads, set up bathrooms, set up tents for dining, cooking, eating. It was like, I think each one of the aid stations required about 30 horses and all those people hiking in, It was a 2-day hike to the closest aid station and a 6-day hike to the furthest away aid station. So very big logistical thing. So it's hard to scale that up to like 200 people because suddenly you need 120 tents instead, So it was like always limited to 20 international athletes and 9 Bhutanese athletes. And so my job as the international athlete manager was recruiting those athletes, vesting them, and then obviously being there for them as sort of their like babysitter or whatever you want to call it, answer any questions, be the liaison between them and the race and stuff like that. There's a lot of media there. There was like Japanese TV, Bhutan TV. There was a couple videographers. So I was kind of like the guy that were like, we didn't allow them to speak directly to the athlete. So they would come to me and say, "Hey, can I do an interview with this athlete tomorrow at 2 o'clock?" And I would facilitate that. Um, but like leading up to the race, the biggest job was really recruitment, investing the athletes, because you could apply on the website, and people were applying on the website, but a lot of the athletes also got pretty much. I did a big outreach because we're looking for athletes that have some involvement in environmental causes, like like POW, protect our winters, or some sort of engagement in environmental purpose, um, that hopefully have a good connections to media, or have a really good strong following on social media, are well respected, and after all are physically capable of doing it, and physically be able to spend the time, because it was like a 20-day trip, with like traveling there, being there a few days early for cultural stuff, for media stuff, running the race. I mean, all the people had to take quite a bit of time out of their lives.
So, was this a one-time event, or is this going to be an annual thing?
I don't think the decision has been made yet. By obviously, it's up to the country of Bhutan. I think they realized how much work it is. I think when they started this, they didn't. They were like, "Oh, let's put on a race with 20 people, and they just run through our mountains, and that's it." I think as it evolved, they realized how much work it is and costs associated with it too. I mean, just think about like all the costs involved. Um, and So there is talk about possibly make it every other year, possibly doing it every year, but that hasn't been decided yet. But I think the decision that has been made is that they want to do it again. I've heard that from like His Majesty, the King. We had like an audience with him, and he said, "Yes, I want the Snowman Race to happen again." Now obviously,
Well, then there should be no problem to get it funded, right? If it comes all the way from the top.
yeah, yes and no. I mean, the thing is, it sounds like oh wow, the king, but Bhutan is a very poor country, and you would think the king lives in like an elaborate like castle and like drives a G-Wagon and a Rolls Royce or whatever, but I can tell you he doesn't. He's actually a really really cool guy. I mean, like I said, I had the fortune to meet him several times during this trip, and he's actually just kind of a normal guy. I mean, he's 40. I think he's 43 years old now, which helps that he's not like ancient old, and so yeah. So I think Bhutan is a very poor country, even on the top. Obviously, um, if you're the king, obviously your lifestyle is a little better than if you're like a poor farmer out in the woods. But it's not it's not like luxury over the top anything. So yeah, so they still will have to find the money to make it happen. It's not like there's just money sitting around. They just have to say like, sure, here's the money.
So to backtrack a little bit, that Snowman Trail, that is an existing trail, an existing route that has that name, right? So that Snowman wasn't just, you didn't just come up with that for that race for marketing purposes. That's actually the name of the trail, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you go online and you search like Snowman Track Bhutan, it's an official route. It's like the if you search John Muir Trail or Pacific Crest Trail, it's an officially recognized route. And you can go there and track it. There's tracking companies who offer like supported backpacking tracks. Like I said, it's usually around 30 days to do it. It's a very long track. It's hard. It's lots of up and down, really technical trails. Um, it's super legit. But yeah, the track exists. But I would I would call it more of a route than a trail, at least for most part.
So, do you have any sense of why the Majesty thought that a foot race would be the vehicle for this message? I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, he actually he has hiked the Snowman Track himself. He's like an avid outdoorsman, mountain biker. He's very athletic. Um, he has hiked the Snowman Track himself, and I think that area is where the climate change is the most noticeable, visibly, and from people getting affected. Um, it really affects the people living there, and so I think that's why he wanted to do something there. And then I think then you can't have a mountain bike race there, right? You can't. What else? You could have, yeah, you can have a trail race there, So I think it was kind of that's how it came up.
I have so many other questions, but the most obvious question, the most pressing question is how do you get connected with that living in California? And I know you've done mountaineering stuff, but I mean, how did you get connected?
Yeah, that's actually it's a pretty crazy story. So, um, 3 years ago, actually, right around this time, early November, I was planning on a trip for the following year with my son, and I always was fascinated by Bhutan. I don't know why. I always thought this is just such a cool country, and I had heard about the Snowman Track, and so I started looking into possibly finding a way financially to make it happen to go over there and hike the Snowman Track in the following year in 2020. And so I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone, really good friend of mine, training partner. I'm like, yeah, just looking at those trips, but man, it's so expensive. And he's like, well, what are you doing now? And I'm like, well, I really want to go to Bhutan and do the Snowman Track. And he starts laughing. I'm like, what's up? And he's like, well, Louis Escobar, he's a mutual friend of my best friend and myself. He's like, well, Louis, he's going to Bhutan. He's getting involved with a race there. I'm like, what? You crazy? Louis is not putting on a race in Bhutan. And he's like, no, he mentioned something. I have no idea what it is, but you should ask him. So like, so I get off the phone. I'm all curious now. What is Louis? Which I know Louis for 20 years, right? Because he's from here, like same area where I'm from, and so I'm texting him. I'm like, Jad just said you're going to Bhutan for a race. What's up? And literally like a minute later, I get a reply, and it said, yes, I am. Wanna be involved? Call me. So I'm like, okay. So I called him, and he tells me the story how through a mutual friend of his, like they approached him, and he approached someone else and said, who has connections in Bhutan, hey, they want to put on this race, can you help? And then he's like, oh, I don't know, but I have a friend and he knows Luis Escobar. And so that's how he got involved in that. And so I'm calling him, he tells me that story, and he's like, well, I'm going there for like meetings and a few days hiking on the trail and explore the possibilities of working with them putting on this event. I'm like, yeah, I would love to go. He's like, okay, we're leaving next Friday. It was literally like a week out. I'm like, whoa, okay. And so he's like, you have 24 hours. Let me know if you do. Fill out this paperwork, send it over there with a copy of your passport to get like a visa immediately, book your flight, we're going. I'm like, I got off the phone, talked to my wife, and the next day I booked airfare, and a week later I went to Bhutan with Luis Escobar. So that's how I, in the first place, got there. And then we had those, at that point, they already had like a board of directors, and a chairperson running that. So we met with those people. They like sent us out with like they sent us out for like 3 days onto the trail to see parts of the mountains. It was an amazing trip, and we had lots of meetings with them, and they asked us our experience and what we thought and how we could help and this and that, and then at the end of it, pretty much it ended up that they hired Louis as the race director and me as the athlete manager. So that's kind of how I got involved in that. And then that was 3 years ago, and then obviously we in November we started planning, started recruiting, and then March COVID started, and then we're like kind of in this holding pattern, and then COVID got better, and then we're like, well, maybe it happens in 21, and then COVID still was going on, and we kept working on it, and now it finally happened this year. So it was a long time in the making.
How was it? I mean, you've done lots of mountaineering trips yourself. You've ran lots of races. How was it being out there in a sort of a official capacity and not actually putting a bib on yourself? Did you have some FOMO? Were you sitting there like, I wish I would be able to run this thing myself?
Yeah, so, well, it's funny. Initially, they offered me a spot on the race. They're like, if you want, you can take one of the spots. And I was like, I'm a good runner, but I'm just not that good of a mountain runner. Like, I mean, I'm not, hard rock, those kind of races are just not my races. It's too technical, too tough. So I said, no, I'd rather be involved on the other end. And that was always fine until we're actually there, and like, we had a few cultural days, and that was fine. And then we actually went to Gaza, where the starting line is. And the 2 days before the race, we would go for runs with the team, like everyone who wanted to go for a run, little shakeout. And I was like, I'm running with those like 30 people or 29 people. And I was like, man, I wish I could toe the line tomorrow, But then I like went and spent a couple days on the course, and I was like, thank God I didn't. Because the course is just so hard. And I honestly, I don't know if I could have finished the race. I really don't. It's just a really big hard race. So, but yeah, I did have that for a little while until I realized, what, I'm glad I'm not out there right now.
I mean, there's a technical aspect, and then there's the altitude aspect, right? I mean, you live more or less at sea level, right? So being able to be comfortable in that altitude is something that you need a lot of preparation for.
So yeah, and then it's interesting because they also, afterwards, a few of us stayed for a few extra days to go to the Highland Festival in Laya, which was a beautiful event. I would recommend to search on YouTube and check it out. Highland Festival in Laya, beautiful. Got to ride a yak, and they have a run there, the Laya Run, and it's a 25K, and it starts 25K out from Laya. And I thought like, oh, maybe I do the Laya Run. That would be kind of cool. And it's like maybe like out of those 25K, 10Ks on the Snowman course. And then I decided not to do it because I was like, well, you know what? We're all there as a group. We're going to hike in together with some of the important people like the Minister of Tourism. And you know what? It's going to be more fun and more appropriate to not go and run that race. And so I was kind of disappointed, especially when we like saw the starting line. But same thing, about like 2 hours into that hike, I was just like, I'm so glad I'm not running this as a race. It was just at parts just so steep and so technical. And I'm like, you know what? If I would be in the race, I wouldn't go any faster right now than I'm going hiking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'm like, so same thing. I had some fear of missing out for like a very short period.
I can imagine. That is amazing. So, were you? I've watched enough BBC shows. Meeting the king, were you prepped on how to approach him, or is he chill?
Yeah, they definitely. I mean, there's like definitely like gave us some pointers. I mean, there's certain things like there's like no photos, like, and they're very strict about that. Even on like a public event like the Laya Highland Festival, like as soon as His Majesty shows up, you have your phone has to be in your pocket. You can't take photos. There's only officially permitted photos. Like we got our photo taken with him, but there was like an official photo that his photographer took, and then we got a copy of it. Um, there's like there's definitely like no hats. You have to take your hat off. There's no shaking hands. And then uh, the Bhutanese people, they're obviously a lot more strict. I mean, they have their head down and stuff like that, which we didn't really have to do. You know, um, so yeah. But then it's funny, like because like when we had our audience with him after the race, we were in this like military headquarter in this sort of like officers like dining event facility with couches and stuff, and we're all standing there, and he comes in, and he's like, he was just like, hey guys, it's okay, because everyone was kind of like got kind of like a little bit like awestruck, and so he's like, it's okay, it's like, why don't we just sit down on the couches and like I'll come around and we just talk, and we're like, okay. So I walked back to the couch where had been seated before, and like I looked to the side, and suddenly he's standing right next to me. He's like, sit down. I'm like, okay. So I sat down, he sits down right next to me and starts talking, and it was like really just like very chill. It was just like just easy going. We like all sat in like kind of a like little square on couches, and people asked questions, and he answered, and he asked questions, and the queen, his wife, she was absolutely lovely. She like it was really cool. She like followed like the athletes on Instagram, and it was like the sweetest thing. She like was one of the athletes, got altitude problems, had to get helicoptered out, and so she knew all about that. And that athlete was not at this audience because she was sick in the hotel. And so the queen was very concerned. She's like, yeah, I hope she's okay. And is there anything I could do for her? Maybe I send her some soup. And the queen got a driver to bring soup and some chocolates over or something to the hotel. So very concerning, and knew everything on Instagram, and asked the athletes, "Oh yeah, I saw this on your Instagram account that you really struggled on day 2. Tell me about it." And it was really really cool. I mean, something where you would may think like, oh, someone on that level, they're not that deeply involved or don't care. You know,
Or they don't even get access to it, right? I mean, perhaps that's the other thing, because everything is manhandled by some department.
yeah, you would have thought, oh, I, I wasn't really I didn't know what to expect when we had that audience. I thought, oh, maybe it's this thing where we're all sitting in our assigned seat, and then he walks in and sits in his assigned seat and says, "Hey, thanks for running our race. You guys are awesome, and have a good evening." And he leaves. So I don't. I could have been happening, so but it was the absolute opposite. Yeah, it was really really cool. This, I mean, very intelligent person, very well spoken, and I mean, it was, yeah, that was really something.
That's fantastic.
um,
So tell me a little bit about the race, and especially with the perspective from the Westerners coming to the area. I assume some people probably had some mountaineering, high altitude experience, but how was it for the racers?
you know what, it's the biggest struggle was the altitude. Even for like our guys that come from Colorado or Montana or whatever, I mean, yeah, I mean, you can live at like 8,000 feet and run up to 12,000 or 13,000 feet all day long, but if on day one the race starts at, I don't know, 10,000 feet and finishes at like 14.5, and you spend the night there, and then the next day you go over 16 and 17,000 feet and you spend the night at 16K, that's just rough. I mean, I know it from mountaineering, and it's just rough at those elevations, and so that was really the biggest struggle for all the Westerners, I think. Even so, some use hypoxycoat tents and some live in mountainous states, but I don't think any one of them acclimatized to the level that was needed to perform to a top level in this race. That's why all the drops were, none of the Bhutanese dropped. Like the Bhutanese runners, they all finished. The people that dropped were Western runners, and it was like largely due to altitude problems.
Yeah, it is difficult, right? If you organize a race, then the mindset is a little bit, I'm going to go there to run a race, but it is, in some respects, more of an expedition.
Yes, and that was always my point as the athlete manager. I always said, look, I look at this like a mountaineering expedition. You know what? We want everyone to summit, and we want everyone to come back down alive, and that's 100% success. At the end of an expedition like that, it doesn't matter who was the guy who was on the summit the first or not. It's we all summited. That was my goal. And I mean, we didn't have any major injury. We had a couple of medical evacuations via helicopter for altitude sickness. They weren't really super, super severe. It was a little more precautious. It wasn't like okay, this person needs to get off the mountain or they're gonna die in the next 6 hours, or like you hear from Everest or something like that. It wasn't that anything really that severe. But we really didn't have any major. No one got lost. Um, no one got really. I mean, it's very easy to trip and fall and really get hurt. No one got injured. So I think it was a great success from that standpoint. And I think a lot of people got into that mindset that, yeah, you know what, there's a bigger purpose to the why I'm here. This is not just like, yeah, if I go and sign up for Leadville 100, well, why are you there? Well, to win the race. That's the only thing, right? There's nothing else to do. But here I think it turned more into like a bigger purpose, when they saw the culture. And the people of Bhutan, they're such a loving, like like I don't know, human beings. I really made some of the best friends in my life there during this trip with like local people that I worked with. Um, and I think everyone, with every day spent before the race, got a bigger understanding of that. Why are they there? And that why is not to win a race. It's to participate in this run across the mountains, to help those people of Bhutan, to bring awareness to climate change. And if I get fifth or third or eighth or 10th or 20th, doesn't really matter. I think that became more and more clear. Um, little less for the Bhutanese people. The Bhutanese runners, they had a little bit more on the line. For them, national pride. I mean, the woman who won the women's race, she's like from Laya, one of the most remote villages in Bhutan. She's a yak herder. She's 29 years old. She's a mother of three. And like for her, she's now suddenly on national TV. And for the people of Bhutan to meet His Majesty, that's, I mean, for someone like us, it's cool. But for them, they grew up with since they're little children, to like admire the king, and they got to meet the king. I mean, it's like that's something. I think all those people, they could die tomorrow and they would have lived the happiest life on the planet. You know, um, so to them it was a lot more meaningful, and that became very clear because they ran super aggressive. They ran to win. Because they wanted to represent their country and His Majesty and everything, So, and they are amazing mountain runners. I mean, I'm telling you, some of those guys, I really think they could compete with lots of our Western runners. You know, maybe not in 100 mile. I mean, obviously that's a whole different thing. Running a marathon 5 days in a row is very different from running 100 miler. But they're very, very good
Yeah, that's
runners.
amazing.
So,
I think it also helped from a safety point of view that you ran marathons during the day, right? I think that that means that people weren't too long on the trail. They were on the trail during the daylight and stuff, right?
yeah, and I mean, it still was plenty of 9, 10 hour, 12 hour days, But yeah, no, the main thing was safety, and I have to absolutely compliment the country of Bhutan. I mean, Brian Powell and Megan Hicks from I Run Far were there, and obviously they are very world traveled as far as events. Brian Powell actually headed Aid Station One. Megan was running the race, and they said they've never seen so much infrastructure in place. I mean, we had like the command center, the control room, what they called it, in Timbu. It was in the military base. That's where they were tracking everyone. They had like helicopters, first aid responders there. They had the weather forecasting there. They pretty much had their like national weather forecasting. They had their national medical advisory team. They had the military involved. The military was out on the course with radio, for communications. It was really a full whole country effort, which obviously, I mean, Brian said he haven't even seen stuff like that at something like UTMB, But I think it's because it's not a private event, it got put on by the country. Everyone in the country wanted to help out, you know and it's like, and everyone in the country knew about the race too. It's like, I mean, we were in this like tiny little like monastery like up in the mountains on a day hike, and there was only one monk heading it and living there. And he came in, he asked, and we said like, oh, Snowman Race. And he had heard about Snowman Race on the radio, and he was like totally excited that we came by his little temple there. So the whole country knew about it. It was like absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Let me ask you the hard question. Flying Westerners halfway around the world to highlight the challenges of climate change feels a little bit like a juxtaposition. So, how do we take this message now further, right? How do we sort of make this real and spread not just the excitement of the event and the colorfulness and beauty of it, but also the actual reason of why this event needed to happen and had to happen.
Yeah. So okay, so there was actually at the end of the event, a couple days after, there was the first Bhutan climate conference, climate conclave. If you look at it, I think it's on YouTube. It's about a 2.5 hour discussion with panel discussion. Some of the runners were on panels. There were people speaking, climate advocates from like the United Nations, and very cool event with like maybe 100 guests at the event there. Were broadcasted virtually online. It's on YouTube, so there was more. So they want to turn that into actually having a big climate conference attached to it. Yeah. Um, so there was stuff like that. But yes, your question is a very good question, and there have been several athletes who denied, who would have liked to have, who said, I already used up my travel carbon footprint for the year. I'm not going on another international airplane trip and stuff like that. And it's a valid concern. How I look at it is, as a business owner, you may know that too, or you know it, I'm sure. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. And that's how I look at it. Sometimes you have to spend carbon footprint to save carbon footprint. You know, like I'm just thinking. So let's say if you take someone with a huge outreach, let's say a Killian Jornet, right? Has like I don't know 1.5 million followers on Instagram, huge outreach, right? So if he comes, yes, and his carbon footprint is X negative because he's going there. But then he's talking about the climate action, about this and this and this and this to all his followers. If each one of those people just, I don't know, does one trip less with their car to work and rides their bike just one time, multiplied by his reach, we're probably way better off, even so he spent the carbon footprint on that trip. You know, that's how I look at it. Sometimes you just have to invest, you know, to reach awareness. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say here?
No, I think it does. It does very much make sense. And for me, the piece that I'm thinking about is that our individual efforts, if we're starting to recycle and if we're starting to take less trips, anyway, only help from a carbon calculator point of view really is almost moot. What it needs to come down to is that we take this issue so serious that we are starting, in the way we vote, in the way we pressure the companies we either work for or the companies that we do business with, in a way that they are starting to adopt better practices, right? And I think that's where this conversation is so important, because if we prioritize it and make it a reality in our everyday life, then it will become then it actually becomes a reality. Then it's not just something weird political out there, but it becomes something that we care about in the same way we care about all of other important things or other frivolous things like what the latest shoes are, right? Let's talk about not what the latest shoes are or the latest gear. Let's talk about how this is a reality and how we need to take this serious. And perhaps there is no easy answer to that, right? Perhaps it's not just, okay, ride your bike twice and you're good for the year, right? Perhaps this is something we actually need to wrestle with for a while.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think, sometimes, like I said, you have to like create those events and meetings for people to communicate and talk and brainstorm. And like, yeah, like it's like you and I, we're burning electricity right now. For what? Just to talk. Yeah, but like this is important that we talk. And with this talk, we may reach other people who then think it's important and then maybe take some action, whatever action that is. Talk to the employer about improving something, voting for someone that wants to improve something. If we all just say, oh, let's just stay at home in our house and not go out and not talk and not do anything, I'm not sure if that would really solve the problem.
Yeah, and I think we would get exhausted too quickly, right? That is sort of the interesting challenge. How can we embed the reality of climate change into our life and into our psyche without it becoming a big boogeyman that scares us?
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that.
Well, super. I absolutely loved that story. I love that you were able to get to experience that. I love that it wasn't just an adventure, that it wasn't just an international trip that exposed you to a different culture, but it had that bigger focus that hopefully can be the start and the continuation of this very, very important conversation around how we're saving our planet, because we only have one planet. Mars is way too far away. At least for the foreseeable future, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to live there anyway.
Well, I mean that's the other thing, right? It's like let's look at the beauty that we have right here on this planet and try to make it work rather than go to a planet where it looks very hostile.
But yeah, no, I mean, but like Bhutan, it was just like it's like just I mean, I personally I absolutely fell in love with the country. It's like, and I'm already having plans for some other project I'm thinking about doing there, together with their like track and field organization because I'm still deep in my heart a track and field and road running guy too, you know, and I had the pleasure to meet their national team coach and the president of BAF, Bhutan Amateur Athletic Federation, who runs essentially is like their USA track and field organization, and we talked about doing some projects together. To help with track and field running in Bhutan, which is a sort of a non-existing sport, and they really want to grow that. And so because the people, it's just like it's just so amazing. They have so little, but they give so much. Like, and that's not just necessarily materialistic. I mean, like it's just like the love and the passion. It's just like it's just crazy to see such a small country that the people can be so like powerful in you know um it was just really cool. Like I said, I mean, um like the two sonams tandem, I mean, the coach, you know, like I made friends for a lifetime. I mean, they were like just it was just amazing, you know. And that was for me personally, that was the biggest takeaway, was the human aspect. And like I found a lot more belief in the human good and human kindness again that I have lost a little bit in the last 2 or 3 years. If there's really, if we on this planet still have a lot of human kindness and love, and I mean that was like very rejuvenating. Like those 3 weeks, you know, and rightfully so. Like Bhutan, their new tourism slogan, it's Bhutan Belief, you know, and it's very very appropriate, you know, because I came back with a new belief in humans, you know, no matter what your level of education is or financial situation. I met very poor people. I met considerably wealthy people for the country. I mean, I had drinks with the prime minister, the foreign minister. I had drinks with the right hand man to the king. I had an audience with the king, but I also met people who live, you know, make food in their kitchen for you on a two little burner camping stove, and when they're done, they lay down in that same kitchen where you were sitting with their children and roll out a blanket and sleep on the floor of that little house, you know. And but everyone was kind. Everyone was a good human being, and that's really um, an important thing because without that, we don't need to talk climate change. You know, if there's no human kindness on this planet, then climate change will definitely not happen. So that's where I feel it starts. So
Yeah, yeah. Rick Steves has a book out, and it's called "Travel as a Political Act," and I think that is such a powerful message that if we get to know people from other cultures, from other backgrounds, our minds are open, but our hearts are open because we connect with people that have different experiences, and we realize that we actually all humans, that we all can get along together. And I think making these kind of experiences does, yeah, it fundamentally changes you, right?
and I had experiences like that, similar to that before. Like I would say in Tanzania. I had experience like that probably before in Nepal, but never to the level like this time in Bhutan. So it was like, yeah, it was like whatever, getting like a dose of fresh life or something. I don't know, you know. So that was really the best thing about the whole trip, you know. And really, it's funny because with all this said and done, the race was really just a minor little speck in this whole event. Yeah.
So, if people want to learn more about the Snowman Race, where can you send them? What's a good website? Where's a good overview of how this whole thing went down and the backstory of it all?
Yeah, so there's like obviously the website. It's snowmanrace.org. You can always look at that. Um, that's like, you know, there's not that much background info. It's more like the race website. Um, it's always good to follow the Instagram account at Snowman Race, because there's always like posts about what's going on in Bhutan. You know, you can always follow Tourism of Bhutan, which is a good Instagram page if you wanna like just look at pretty Bhutanese buildings and nature and stuff. Um, or if you want, you know, you can always send me an email with any question or any thoughts you have. My email is thomas@snowmanrace.org. Um, yeah, or follow me, same thing on my Instagram handle, thomas.rei55. Yeah.
We'll have all these links in the show notes. That was such a amazing like breath of fresh air, a story coming so from a different world, from a different experience. I very much I don't know, I didn't feel like I was jealous. I feel like I was excited to be able to travel with you through these experiences, and so it was very great to kind of hear your story, and thanks for bringing that to the show.
Yeah. Well, maybe when I do my project over there that I'm planning on, I give you a few more details probably in a couple of weeks or so. Maybe you can go with me and experience it on yourself. So.
Well, there we go. It's recorded. Thomas, thanks for coming on Singletrack.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure as always. Hopefully, next time we come up with another new, interesting story to have me back.
I believe it's in your hand. Come up with cool stuff, and you'll always welcome to come back.